Muted.
For joining us today. My name is Lori Rawlings. I'm the Executive Director of PMC SMACCA, and today we're going to be talking about burden labor costing. Our presenters today are Michael and Kelcey Thompson, who are co-owners of Applied Management Group. They have extensive experience mentoring business owners in management, administration, sales, accounting, technical service, and a lot of other business essentials that can help you run your business more profitably. So Michael and Kelcey, thank you for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hold on one second. We seem to have...
We're having... Sorry about that.
All right. I think you got us unmuted now?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that.
That is all right. I'm not sure. Can you, well, we'll try for both of us here. Kelcey, are you unmuted?
I believe I am.
Yep, we can hear you, Kelcey.
Well, thank you so much, Lori and Diane, for having us here today. We appreciate the time and effort that you put into this, and we're very excited to be able to present on the burden labor costs and how that really affects your business on a day-to-day business. So let's get started. We're actually presenting on Apex eSuite, which is our suite of online tools that will help dealers and customers be able to do this burden labor costing themselves, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. But for now, we'd like to just really start by identifying what is burden labor costing and how it affects your business. Burden labor costing is really your direct labor. It's those individuals that are out there generating the revenue for your company. And you take those, that right now, most people do that as what's called loaded labor. They'll take their wages, their taxes, their benefits, and come up with a figure that's called loaded labor. Burden labor actually goes beyond that. You take your labor costs, which is your direct, and a percentage of indirect labor. And what we mean by indirect labor is those individuals that are, for lack of better terms, say support staff. Those are the individuals that are directly helping these people generate revenue. So that's your indirect labor. And then you've got vehicle costs. If you have vehicles, if there's something involved with that, you also need to include your vehicle cost. We take a look at the different components of that. And then a percentage of overhead. And that percentage of overhead is really assigning, because you've got a cost associated with the individual, you also have overhead costs that they need to be responsible for as well, because they are responsible for generating the revenue to pay for that. And we combine all of those into what's called burden labor costing. So let's take a look at that a little differently. If you've got just one individual, it's pretty easy to be able to calculate out how their costs, their responsibilities are. But when you start adding 2 and sometimes 3 individuals, 5, 10 even, and you try and calculate each one of their individual burden labor costs, it becomes much more easy to manage that team and who's doing what. Then you include perhaps a lead technician or a master plumber or someone with the advanced skills that you use specifically for either larger jobs or very specific jobs. And you start calculating out all of their costs for each and every one of those. You can start to determine more easily how you use them in your day-to-day operations. Then you include vehicles. Now, vehicles have a wide range, and as we've worked over the years with different companies, we've seen everything from small little pickup trucks to large straight trucks to semis to you name it. And those costs all vary, and it can be associated with either a department or an individual in that department, depending on how you set it up. Those costs also need to be added in. Then you start adding, from a department, you start adding the other individuals, the indirect labor that we talked about. You look at the person who answers the phone. You know, how much of their time is actually spent directing calls or working with customers and directing that information back to that particular department. Is it 25% of the time, 50% of the time? Then the parts of their wages should be directly associated with that department. Then you can add in service coordinators or dispatchers or parts people or managers, all of these other individuals whose sole responsibility is the profitability of that department. So now you've got their costs directly associated with that department and then brought back down to the individuals. And then, of course, you've got overhead costs. Now, overhead costs, again, you've got kind of a general term that most people use, but what we like to do is actually break it down with more specific percentages, and there are ways in which you can calculate out what that's at as a percentage of revenue or square footage of the building that you used, all sorts of things that can go in to help you do that. And we help people be able to understand that all of those different categories. In fact, at Applied Management Group, we've discovered over 50 different factors that go into really creating your burdened labor costs. Once you've done that, you have that number for each of these individuals, then you've got to remember that that burdened labor cost is something you've got to look at for every hour that they're basically on the clock for you. And that amounts to what can be a considerable amount of money. And now you start to take a look at how do we use those individuals? How do we take their time and best utilize it to generate the revenue that we actually hired them to do? So often we've seen companies where the individuals, they have high-paid individuals, those that are directly associated with generating revenue, and now suddenly these people are sweeping floors, or they're cleaning out trucks, or they're doing mowing. We've seen them mowing lawns and painting offices. You start looking at that number, and suddenly you realize what it's really truly costing you to do that. Excuse me. So what we've done with the Apex eSuite, with the burden labor costing tools, we create a report for you that you can take a look at. And this is a copy of our report, but it gives you some great information. We don't do a big fancy Excel spreadsheet. We give you the down and dirty and give you the information you need to do the day-to-day stuff. But let's take a look at this and really how that affects your day-to-day operations. If you take a look at the total burden labor cost, again, this is a service technician. It's kind of an average one that we've used. And you look at, he's $64 an hour. Now this person, their actual wages are far less than that, but you start adding in their direct labor costs, which you can see from the report, and I know this is a bit of an eye strain, but it's almost $30 an hour. But vehicle costs, another $11. Indirect costs are only a couple dollars an hour, and then overhead costs are almost $21 an hour.
Wow, so Michael, the total burden labor cost for this individual is more than double the direct labor costs, so that's wage and benefits. That's a really significant difference. Is that typical of something that you would see when you sit down and actually calculate your burden labor costs?
Laura, that's a great question, and you are correct. In fact, what we found is it's 4 to 5 times your wages, and that's again depending on your company, but it can be 4 and 5 times greater in your actual wage costs than your loaded labor costs.
Okay, so this really kind of visualizes for you all those hidden costs that you're not really thinking about when you're having somebody do a task, and it maybe kind of can be used as a tool to help you use your people more efficiently?
Exactly. That's what we've created this, and that's what we found is that's exactly what it does. In fact, it was kind of interesting as we built this program, and we've used it over the years with many companies, but as we built the actual online software, the developer, as we taught them and trained them on how to use this, walked past an office one day and saw his chief financial officer and his lead technician building a desk, and it suddenly occurred to him what that was costing him per hour to have them assemble a desk. And he said that made him sick to his stomach. We found that time and time again. Once you have the true associated costs, the true burden labor costs, not only can you use this to be able to help you make sure that you're maximizing the time for that individual, but now depending on the size of the jobs, depending on the projects that you're working on, you can, and the profitability, if it's in a bid spec of some sort, you can start to pick and choose which technicians, which individuals you have working on that based on their total burden labor cost to maximize your profitability. If you don't need your lead technician in a job to sweep the floors or clean up or do a simple maintenance program, perhaps it's better to have one of the lower end technicians come in to be able to do that job and keep your lead technician doing those jobs which A, require his talents and skills, but B, also have the profitability to be able to afford to have him there.
Wow. So am I reading this report correctly that the estimated weekly profit on this individual is actually a negative number?
Yes. This is an individual where their current labor rate, there are two issues you see as we look at this report, and we'll show you a little bit more. One is their current labor rate is too low. Their hourly net profitability between their burden labor cost and their actual retail labor rate is only 2%, which by anybody running business, that's not a profit margin you want to have.
Mm-hmm.
But the other piece of this, if you look just below that, their efficiency is far too low. They're only billing about 12 hours per week for this individual, which again, yeah, that's a really common issue that we have with these companies. It's like, well, you know, he's got travel time, he's got all these other things that have to play into your costing that most companies never take a look at.
Sure.
At 12 hours per week, build time, his revenue generation is down well under $1,000. His costs are well over $2,500. He's losing they're losing $1,700 a week on this individual.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay, so you can start to kind of think about, once you have that information in front of you, it may help you figure out how to get this person to be billing more hours per week versus taking care of other tasks.
Well, there's a couple different things you need to take a look at, and that's why we actually, in this report, will show you, you need to be able to up your labor rate, but we don't encourage people just to randomly continue to bump it up, because a lot of times you're making mistakes until, you know, it's kind of like you might keep raising it up and then still not be making the money you need. That's why we show that even if you were to raise, let's say you added 50% to your labor rate, as you see in the columns that we have in the middle there, and charge $96 an hour instead of $64, you would still have to bill a minimum of 5.3 hours per day just to break even. Well, if you're only billing 12 hours a week right now, which is less than 3 hours a day, you'd have to almost double your billing, and you're still only going to break even if you charge $96 instead of $64. So if you look at labor efficiency and you said, okay, well, how about if I can only bill, let's say, 6 hours a day? Well, then you're going to need to be somewhere in that same range to be able to pay for them as well. Your break even at 5.6 hours is $91 an hour. So you've still got to make a huge jump. So the key in this situation is not just raising your labor rates, but also understanding how many hours per week we're billing out and what we're using this individual for to be able to bill out their time. Because if people are saying, well, I'm having them drive long hours to get here, long hours to get there, and you're not covering those costs, you're still going to lose money unless you jump up way, way, way higher in what you're billing out. So this is why we try and use this report to show people that, quite honestly, you need to balance between just raising a rate and understanding how many hours a week you bill and how we can use that individual better and be more efficient in their billing time to be able to make sure that you're A, competitive in your marketplace, and B, you know, making the profit margins that you actually need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because many companies don't really have a realistic option of doubling their retail rate to increase their profit. So it seems that you're able to point to some different efficiencies to help them be more profitable without having to raise their rates so much that they drive off customers.
There are ways to do that. There's also flat rating, which I think most industries are very familiar with, and how you can start to build in some flat rate numbers and different things that can help with that as well too. There are other tools, but you are correct, and this is where you've also got to take a look at how quickly can we get them onto their job site in the morning. How quickly can we maximize the time? Then you start to take a look at even the little things like, well, I have them stop and pick up parts because their inventory on their vehicle wasn't right, or the inventory at the job site wasn't right. So I take my lead technician and I'm going to send him to a store to pick up parts. And now suddenly you look at that labor rate per hour, it's even at $64 an hour, and it takes him an hour to go get a part. A $5 part now became exponentially more expensive, and you've lost time on the project, so you've added to your costs. Your profitability's gone down. So these are the things that start to, well, compound on themselves once you have this number. Is what do I need to do? I need to make sure that my inventories are correct. I need to make sure that jobs well scheduled. All of these things start to become more powerful, and we can help people with that. If you've got that issue, we can come in and help you analyze where you're at and be able to do that. So there are tools available once you have this number. But Lori, quite honestly, until you have this number, you really can't be aware of where you're really losing all that time and all that revenue.
Okay.
So let's take a look at, once you've gotten this report, and like I said, we've tried to keep the report very simple as opposed to getting very elaborate, but how you come about that report is, and come up with this number, is kind of one of the keys. Like we said, you can spend, we've had people try it with, you know, the calculator and the pen and paper, and we've seen some very elaborate Excel spreadsheets out there. And a few of them I've tried to work through myself, and quite honestly didn't even come up with a number that I could work with. But at the end of the day, what we did is we created what's called the Apex eSuite suite of tools. And I would encourage anybody that's listening to this broadcast to go out and try that. That we have what's called a sneak peek. And you can click on that, enter in a wage per hour, and it will give you an estimated burden labor cost, which will give you at least an idea of where you should be on an hourly cost. Doesn't mean it will be accurate for your company, but we'd encourage people to take a look at that. The other thing that you can do in this situation is, again, we built this tool to be pretty simple, a lot like TurboTax. In fact, I'm going to bring Kelcey on now, because Kelcey is actually the person that designed and built this program, and have her give you some of the details of the overall program. So Kelcey, why don't you give them a background piece on really how locations work, how you add or subtract users, and that sort of thing.
Well, to start out, in looking at this,
Kelcey, could you, you know what, we're having a little difficulty hearing you. Could you hold for a second? We try to.
Is that better?
That's much better.
Okay. So what we did is we created this program so that it's very user-friendly, and just like Michael said, it's a lot like TurboTax. It gives you the ability to invite users in, and if you have a bookkeeper that you want to have available to be able to enter the numbers in, you can do so, and you can also invite your CPA in. And what this program does is it's very open. You have the ability to use your names, if you want to call it a service tech, or if you want to call the individual by their name, and you put different locations in of, do you have one location? We're obviously here in Wisconsin. Do you have one in Milwaukee, and do you have one in Madison? Do you want to call it Milwaukee? Do you want to call it Madison? You are able to utilize the program so that it's comfortable for you to be able to see your information.
The other thing you can take a look at with this, and one of the areas that we love doing this is again, being the TurboTax simple, we ask the questions. Most of what you find here, you're going to see a lot like TurboTax. We ask you the question, you're going to fill it out with reports that you already have. So it's not like you have to, you know, go digging for a lot of information. In some cases, if you've got payroll being done by your accountant, you can invite them in, have them fill in the sections for you to be able to gather that information. So it works very well to be able to do that. The nice thing, as you can see on the screen, again, it's very plug and play, very simple. The nice thing is once you've got this done, Now you can start to do your budgeting. Now you can start to do forecasting. You've got the capability of really stepping out with this number and starting to look at not only currently what are we doing and if we're making money, which is something you were referring to when we looked at the report, but what do I need to do to grow the business for next year? How much revenue do I actually have to create in order to hit the profit margins I want? Or perhaps if I want to give raises or bonuses, if I want to hire somebody new into a department. Lori, I'm sure you probably experience this as well too with companies, is when the question, when do I hire somebody new?
Right, definitely.
And this is one of the areas where a lot of times it's kind of, oh, you flip a coin to see whether or not you think you can do it, and then you scramble to try and be able to pay for them once you've got them in. This is a way for you to actually forecast how much revenue do I need to generate at what wage to be able to pay for this person, and start to affix costs to that and understand overall what's a performance metric that we need to create in order to have this person go.
That sounds a lot more scientific than flipping a coin.
Yes, it is, and it's actually much more effective. So this is where you can, again, you can look at that. We have cloning capability on this as well too, where you actually, once you have somebody in, you actually click, we have a way to clone that person, then you can play. You can add the numbers. Kelcey, you can give them a little bit more detail on this part of it.
When you're cloning an individual, let's say you have your highest paid service tech and you want to hire another one that's going to be paid at the same level or very close, you can clone that individual without having to re-enter all of those numbers and all the figures, and all you would have to do is, if he's going to receive or he or she is going to receive the same benefits, then you can just enter whatever pay rate they're going to be, and if they're, then you're able to see how much their burden labor cost is for that specific individual, how much they need to be able to generate in revenue to pay for themselves prior to hiring them.
Wow, so you can actually kind of have a trial run at hiring a new employee without actually making the commitment to do it or messing up your books.
Correct. One of the things that we've heard is, like, an individual that we were working with said, I just hired somebody and I hope that they can pay, that they're going to be able to pay for themselves. We looked at them and said, you do your burden labor cost, you will know prior to hiring them.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So this gives you some of the availability of doing that. Budgeting for the next year. The thing that, Lori, one of the things that we found that I think was probably the greatest aha moment, if you want to use that term, that we found is when we started working with companies and doing this burden labor cost, we started to share and do training with the technicians themselves. And once they started to realize this, once they started to be involved in the overall process, they became more efficient because they understood really what they were costing the company.
So the burden labor cost, it's not something that you just calculate internally and have upper management and the accounting department look at, is what you're saying. You're saying it's a useful number to be sharing with the actual technicians and the people who are generating the revenue?
Absolutely. What we've found in most cases is once we started training the technicians on what they cost the company per hour, then suddenly they started to realize that, well, you weren't paying me 20 and charging 100. You guys are just raking in the money. Suddenly they realized that there is a lot more to this, and they became much more engaged. They became much more empowered, and they actually started to worry more about how much time they were billing out and making sure that they were being very efficient in everything that they were doing. And then we started to add other training on when it came to inventory controls, all of which have benefited the companies we've done this for. That was again an educational component that I had not realized or had not calculated that it would be so effective at really empowering employees.
Great.
So that's been one of the exciting components to this as well too, is you can use these burden labor costs throughout the company in so many different ways. And again, you can see we're showing just a couple of different slides here on how simple it is. But this is something we would encourage all of your customers, all of your members to really go out and take some time to do this. I will tell you that you can you calculate it out for different departments. You can calculate it out for individuals. The more individuals you do, the more accurate you're going to become. We have multiple locations that you can use. All of that's available as you start to do this. So we've got that. And one of the, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just had a question about the multiple locations. So you would use a different location if, say, you had different offices, like one in Milwaukee, one in Madison, one in the Fox Valley.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And the reason you would do that is because each one of those locations has their own expenses.
Okay.
They have their own cost factors. They have all of the metrics in there that you have to calculate for that location, and you want to be very specific for each. Now, obviously, you've got some overhead from a corporate standpoint as well too that can be added in there as well. But for the most part, we go by location, and then you go by department, and then you go by the direct labor individual. And as you break it down that way, it gives you very solid metrics to be able to determine on the day-to-day basis how we want to employ the policies of the company, how we want to change the day-to-day operations to make sure that we're maximizing our revenue generation.
Wonderful.
And one of the things we'd love to extend out as a thank you to you and PMC and to your members is anybody that's listening to this or watching here today. I know we've got several people on. If you want to go out to the apexesuite.com, and if you sign up and use the code PMCWeb16, we'll give you $99 off any subscription that you sign up for, and we'll keep that good through the end of March.
That's really generous. Thank you, Michael. I know I can speak on behalf of my members that we really appreciate that opportunity.
Well, it's our pleasure, Lori. We've always enjoyed working with PMC and look forward to working with you much more in the future. If anybody's got any questions, obviously they can go out to the apexesuite.com. You're more than happy to contact us at 262-697-4470 or info@appliedmg.com, or go through you, Lori, if they want to go through you, and if they've got any questions, we'd be more than happy to work with you all and do some further training or give them any information they're looking for.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, if anyone who's listening today is interested in talking to me directly before approaching Applied Management, you can always contact me here at the office at 414-543-7622, extension 253, or my email address is Lori, that's Lauri, at pmsmca.com. So, well, it seems we've covered a lot of material here today. I want to thank you, Michael and Kelcey. Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Or if there are questions, you can use the chat feature on the side of your screen to type in a question. Otherwise, I'd just ask Michael and Kelcey if there are any final thoughts in terms of anything you think our listeners need to know in terms of burden labor costing or using the Apex e-Suite.
Quite honestly, I think to obviously try it. Go out and do a sneak peek and really at least get an idea of what your burden labor costs are. We've got it, it's available to you 24/7. It is a key component. Whether you go through us or not, it is a calculation that every business, any service industry company should have for each of their employees. It's such a valuable tool in management. Financial accounting and management accounting, we talked in other presentations about that. But at the end of the day, having that number is a performance metric that you really should do to be able to operate on a day-to-day business and hit the profitability numbers that you're looking for.
Great. Wonderful. Well, it doesn't appear there are any other questions, so I just want to thank Michael and Kelcey Thompson again for presenting on behalf of Applied Management Group. And thank you for those of you who listened today. This is Lori Rawlings from PMC SMACCA signing off.